Well, hello and welcome to NAIOP Edmonton's July Luncheon. Back to the office in Edmonton, a panel discussion with some of Edmonton's top experts and employers. Featuring Tara Hamlin, Simon O'Byrne, Corey Wozniak, Christy Pelletier, and moderated by Panita O'Brien. My name is Anand Pai, and I'm the Executive Director here at NAIOP Edmonton. And before we get started with the panel, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about what NAIOP's doing and the people making this work possible. But before we even get into that, just a few housekeeping items while people are signing on here. So you see this is a meeting format that's to promote better conversation between the panelists and people in the audience. Please take a moment to ask your question in the chat. You can see the chat function there. Because it is a meeting, if you have your camera on, it'll be on, and if you turn your camera off, then all the non-video participants will be hidden. So take a moment to think of something in the chat and write it in there. We'll be asking questions throughout, and at the end, and Panita will be moderating those. I wanted to start off by thanking our existing sponsors who've made NAIOP into the voice of commercial real estate. This has been one of the busiest years that I've had here at NAIOP Edmonton, and it's been a real pleasure to work with our sponsors on some of the major projects affecting commercial real estate, like Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, all the way to some of our municipal issues. So I wanted to take a second to thank our Prestige Club sponsors, Panettone Development, Qualico, Remington, and Quadrille, as well as our President's Club sponsors, Bentall Green Oak, Ledcor, Melcor, One Properties, and Pangham Development. You can see that a lot of the major companies here in Edmonton have signed on, and if yours isn't on the list, please consider the industry advertising, membership, and events that come with NAIOP sponsorship. I wanted to talk for a second about our upcoming events. We've got some really exciting things happening soon. In August, we have our golf tournament, one of the biggest golf tournaments in the city this year in support of the Mental Health Foundation. We'll be sending around an opportunity to buy 50/50 and major raffle prize tickets before the event, as well as we've released a few extra tickets. So we have, I think, about 8 tickets remaining. So get yours as soon as you can. Those will be sold out really, really soon. We also have, for the first time ever, I'm pretty excited to announce our mayoral forum happening on September 9th. We've got all of the major candidates signed on for mayor, signed on to come and answer questions about the real estate industry. We'll be doing that in partnership with BOMA, CREW, and UDI, and we're looking forward to having so far the only mayoral forum that I've seen scheduled at September 9th over lunch. That'll be a hybrid event. It'll be our first event back in person and indoors. More like a luncheon event, but we also have the opportunity to host that in your boardroom or personally online. That's the way that events are going, but I'm sure we'll get into that really soon. I'm excited to introduce our moderator today. Panita McBrien is I was going to say relatively new, Executive Director of the Downtown Business Association, doing incredible work over the last several months and in the hardest times that our downtown has seen. So welcome, Panita.
Thank you so much for having me. I still say that I'm new, but 7 months in, I think. Still feels pretty new to me. Thank you for the warm welcome. So we're going to try and make this as informal a discussion as we can. Obviously, we want this to feel like a real conversation. So as we go through the questions, panelists are welcome to jump in and interrupt each other or add to each other's comments. So looking forward to the conversation ahead of us. I'm going to start off by introducing each of our panelists. First up, we have Tara Hamlin joining us. Welcome, Tara. Thank you so much for being here. As a partner at Bishop & McKenzie, Tara proactively advises businesses in employment matters, which are so interesting right now as we go through this transition period. So what are Bishop & McKenzie's return to the office plans right now, Tara?
Well, right now, management is actually tabulating the results of a survey that it sent around to all of the lawyers, all of the staff in the office to find out what people wanted to do on a go-forward basis, because we know as we come out of the pandemic, we are going to have some sort of hybrid work arrangement with us. on a go forward basis. And we know that the associates want that, the staff want that, and most of the lawyers want that. So that's what we're doing right now, is trying to figure out what those arrangements are going to look like and how to implement those kind of hybrid work arrangements in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot more into that as we go along here. Next up, we have Simon O'Byrne joining us. Simon is an award-winning urban designer and planner, and he's Vice President of Community Development in Canada at Stantec. Welcome, Simon. Can you tell us a little? I just managed to mute myself. Can you tell us a little bit about what Stantec's doing in this transition period?
Well, it's different across North America and the world for us. Closer to home, supervisors are talking to staff and asking them what they want to do, what their intentions are. We're going to have some people back at work full time. Some people are doing a hybrid. Some people will work from home full time in perpetuity, and that's arrangement between them and their supervisor in terms of what's going to happen. Globally, we've said that our plan is to reduce our footprint in terms of office space by about a third globally, in light of what's happened with COVID and changing and remote working and having the hotel space and so forth. But I think that one of the things that we've taken away at Stantec is that it's going to be a lot harder than the transition from going from the office to home. I think a lot harder to reverse it and go back the other way. In Florida, for example, because they're ahead of us in the US, we had a recent example where we asked staff in Sarasota, Florida. We said, well, how many people are going back? And in that office, there's over 100 staff, but 55 of them, for example, had said, I'm going to be in the office full time. Well, 2 weeks later, when they kind of did a count to see how many bums and seats we had, of that 55, we only had 20. And so I think that transition is going to be a lot harder than we think. So one of the things we realize is that communication is really key to it. But by communication, I mean that the whole success of working remotely has been the success of these mediums, whether it's Google, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Microsoft Teams, which is the one that we use. And so the trick is, how are we going to do that transition in terms of communication? Because if we are going to go back to the office more regularly, we can't have, it's really awkward if some people, we've all been in boardrooms where it's horrible, where you can't ever hear people properly, where some people are in the boardroom and some people are at home. So those are some of the challenges we have to figure out. The other thing we know is we don't want to use a stick. We want to very much use honey rather than vinegar. So I think one of the big things is FOMO. So we really have to kind of think about what we're going to do to incentivize people. And they have a little bit of a fear of missing out. So that if they're not in the office, they feel like they're missing out. So part of that starts with making sure that supervisors and leaders are back in the office first. The ambitious staff will kind of follow shortly thereafter, and then it goes from there. But we know it's tricky, because we also can't say, well, okay, well, some people are 2 days and 3 days and 4 days. Well, how do we kind of get that so that we get that overlap? So you could have people that are 2 days and 4 days, but they're not really overlapping that much. And so the whole thing about coming back to work is that it's really great for corporate culture and for developing the synergies and cross-pollination that we want. But we know that there's a lot of staff that are not going to be excited about doing that. So how do we kind of incentivize that, and how do we kind of make that work? So in Edmonton, we're at 10 to 20% capacity in the office tower right now. That's how much the doors are open. We don't have that many people taking advantage of that right now. There are people coming in. And we're hoping to transition so that by after Labor Day, hypothetically, the doors are wide open and we could have we on paper could have full capacity after Labor Day. But the thing is, how many of those, if we have full capacity, how many of them are actually going to realize it? So those are the things that there's a lot of fluidity in terms of seeing how it goes and then reacting.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that, Simon. Next up, we have Corey Wozniak joining us. With over 25 years of commercial real estate experience, Corey Wozniak is a principal and managing director at Avison Young here in Edmonton. Thanks for being here, Corey. And can you tell us a little bit about what Avison Young is doing in the whole return to the office transition?
Yeah, thanks, Benita. So as of last week, we require all staff to be in the office for a minimum of 2 days per week. And that's going to increase in September. We're the first Canadian office to to require all our staff to be back on moderation basis. And my personal opinion is it's easier to adjust at a slower pace than what will be a very binary event for a lot of large occupiers, where the summer is going to be more of a continuation of the spring, and then September will be a much larger impact of staff returning to the office. We're doing something different in Edmonton, so we're increasing by moderation. And I feel like it's easier to adjust to when you slowly turn the dial up in terms of the occupancy of space and bringing people back together. We don't require people to be vaccinated to be in the office. In Canada, we can't directly ask. However, in the US, employers can directly ask. And that can impact the decision around who is able to come back to the office depending on vaccination. There's going to be various forms of experimenting, and I'm fascinated by it. I just heard yesterday that one of the largest occupiers in financial core is going to bring all of their staff back for 2 months and then reassess after 2 months to see how everyone feels at that point. I think that's a pretty interesting strategy.
Very interesting strategy. All right. Last but definitely not least, we have Christy Pelletier joining us from the City of Edmonton. In her current role as a Director of Vibrant and Safe City, she provides leadership and coordination in the delivery of activities that contribute to a safe and vibrant city, particularly in downtown. And Christy, can you talk to us a little bit about what the City of Edmonton is doing in terms of bringing people back downtown?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks, Panita. So the theme at the City of Edmonton, of course, during the pandemic and now continued into a reopening strategy, has always been health, safety, and wellness of our employees and the experience that they're having along the way. So of course that needs to continue as we shift from sending people home, which can be stressful to work, to now bringing them back to work. So one of the strategies that we're going to be employing is between now and the end of the summer, it is going to be a reduced capacity in our downtown towers. The reason for that is we do want to continue to maintain our safety and health measures because COVID is still with us. We certainly don't have 100% vaccination across the board. So currently our employees are encouraged to go back, but we do have a scheduling tool that we're using to ensure that we're maintaining a reduced capacity in our downtown towers to help keep that safety front and center and to allow people to be reoriented downtown without, feeling overwhelmed or having to totally rejig their personal life and their plans that they've put in place for childcare, et cetera. But we do want to have 100% return back in the fall by September 20th. We definitely want to have everybody back down working in the downtown. But the one caveat to that is we also recognize there's lots of benefits from a health and wellness perspective, as well as business reasons to have people provided with flexibility to work remotely and at home as well. So we have developed and implemented a flexible work program, and employees can apply to their supervisor to be able to have a hybrid between remote work at home or in another location and in the downtown core. So it is a bit of a hybrid going forward because we want to leverage those learnings, but certainly encouraging a return to the office environment.
Awesome. Yeah, we really appreciate that. And I think it's been really great to see the city show leadership on bringing people back. And so that leads me to talk a little bit about why I'm here moderating this panel. So I really appreciate NAIOP's invitation to do this. Obviously, we at the DBA are kind of right in the middle of this whole chicken and the egg situation that we're in, where how do we revitalize our downtown, stimulate and encourage a recovered downtown economy, local economy, and just make it feel full of life again without office workers working downtown. And so, and then how do we encourage office workers to want to come back downtown and want to spend their days here when things are feeling a little sleepy? So we're really, really excited to have this conversation. What each of our large employers is doing in terms of bringing people back is such an important conversation. And I think it's a big conversation, more so than each of us realize in our individual roles. So employees might be thinking about, I really like working from home. What if I never go back to the office? Or employers might be thinking about, wanting to get people back together for collaboration reasons and business reasons. But, we're looking at this from a one step higher even, and the role that each of our employers, especially large employers, play in having a vibrant downtown, having valuable properties downtown, which supports the tax base for the entire city. You know, we're less than 1% of the entire geographic area of the city, and yet our properties within the downtown make up about 10% of the tax base for the entire city. So what happens within the towers downtown and all of our retail spaces downtown in terms of residential development has a lot to do with the future of our city and our economy and how recovery looks for everyone. So there's a lot at play here, and I'm really happy to have you all here participating in this conversation. So with that, let's get into some questions. I'm going to go back to you, Tara. Beyond just your own firm, which you talked a little bit about, but what are you seeing and hearing among your clients and your network when it comes to bringing people back into the office and some of the key questions and concepts that people are grappling with?
Well, the thing that I'm hearing most from clients right now and from organizations that we work with is, you know, the actual mechanics of bringing people back into the workplace while balancing their obligations under occupational health and safety and the Employment Standards Code and other acts to provide a safe workplace, to provide, you know, an effective work model. You know, many companies are embracing the idea of having their employees do some form of remote work because they've seen the advantages to it. Not everyone, but a lot of them have seen the advantages to having people have that flexible hybrid work arrangement. They're concerned though about how to ensure that the employees are productive. How do you ensure that you're not breaching your obligations under the Employment Standards Code for hours of work and overtime and things like that when somebody is working outside of your line of sight? So how do we maintain this productivity and ensure our compliance when people are working remotely in these kinds of ways? Other employers are asking me about, okay, well, can we demand that people be vaccinated before they return to the workplace? You know, what can we ask people? What can we do to ensure that people are safe when they're back in the office? And that, of course, is a very complicated and, of course, nuanced question. There is no one standard answer for that question for every business, and every business has to decide that on their own. I mean, my advice to people overall has been, you know, unless your business falls into a certain category of businesses and your workers perform certain work, like you work with a very vulnerable population health-wise, like long-term care or children with disabilities, for example, or if your employees work in very remote areas where medical care might be harder to come by and longer to access, if some of your employees are required to travel internationally, for example, as part of their business going into the United States or taking international flights, whereby they would have to show a vaccination passport of some kind to get into other countries to do their work, then my advice to them overall has been a mandatory vaccination policy is going to be very difficult to implement and maintain. And as I say to clients all the time, you can implement whatever you want. It's your business. You just have to be prepared to live with the consequences of that. And supporting that sort of mandatory vaccination policy is going to be very difficult. That's probably the key issue on people's minds right now is can we insist on knowing people's vaccination statuses? And that's a complicated issue. Overall, I've been saying to people, I think that incentivization of vaccinations right now is the best policy that you can adopt for your workforce. There's a number of different things to consider if you want to start mandating a vaccination policy. Number one is that if there are people who actually have disabilities under the Human Rights Act, medical reasons that they can't get vaccinated, or are objecting to it for religious reasons, for example, you have to provide suitable accommodations for those people. There's also the issue of employee privacy. You know, there's a big debate raging in our amongst my colleagues and I right now is whether or not in the circumstances that would be an allowable piece of information to ask. Can you actually ask someone their vaccination status? We're getting a very mixed response on that, and there's not a lot of guidance. So given the difficulties in mandating a mandatory vaccination program, unless your business falls into one of those categories I talked about, I think everyone's better bet is to incentivize vaccinations to maintain the kind of safeguards that we've had over this period of time, you know, social distancing, potentially mask wearing in certain circumstances, hygiene in the workplace, until the pandemic has been declared well and truly finished. by the government, or the government implements a law that requires people to be vaccinated. That would be a game-changing thing, but I don't think we're going to see that from either the provincial or federal governments.
Yeah, that is all so fascinating. And there's a comment in the chat that, yeah, indicates, a lot of people's understanding right now, as you mentioned, is that employers can't be asking people that question. And
sometimes the circumstances dictate that you can ask that kind of personal information. There's a lot that goes into that. How do you collect that information? How do you safeguard it? How do you ensure it's disseminated to the smallest possible group? And I would say that unless you can satisfy the privacy commissioner that you do fall into a category of business that does need to know, that might be a dicey ask.
right.
Yeah. So as I say, it's a bit of a gray area for all of us right now.
No kidding. Corey, a question for you. I think we all know that the workplaces that we're going back to are not necessarily the same workplaces that we left. And if they are, maybe should they not be? So I'm curious what you're seeing already in terms of changes to the office market and the types of offices that people are going to be going back to.
I'm fascinated by the fierce debate online about the changing work environment. It's as though it's replaced the debate about COVID strategy. And on one side, the loudest opinions about remote work have largely been the people who are working remotely before 2020. And those who have been the loudest on the other side are the ones who usually work for property owners. And so the reality is nothing is static. The office is not dead. Way too much credence has been put into staff surveys that were taken without context. I mean, it's like asking staff, do you think you're paid well enough? We need to see the other side of this, and we're beginning to see it now. Just think about how much has changed in 1 year. Every office building on the planet was emptied out. Airports were empty. A cup of coffee was worth more than a barrel of oil. Sports arenas were empty. And you just look at London, England 10 days ago, with Wimbledon and the Euro final and so many US cities, that life has changed significantly. And in Dallas, Houston, and Austin, already 50% of staff are back working in office buildings. So locally, what I'm looking forward to seeing is what happens after September long weekend. Once kids are back in school and parents have that additional flexibility, tens of thousands of college students back in class and thousands of office employees back in buildings, at least for portions of the week to start. So workplace flexibility, it's not a 2020 outcome. For many staff, it was already on the table before last year. More people were using technology to get work done remotely in exchange for more flexibility at the office. And there was already a work-life blend established before last year. Offices had fewer people in them on Fridays, and typically Mondays, there was a lower ramp up to getting offices occupied. Breakfast meetings, pretty much non-existent. All hands staff meetings usually didn't happen before 9 o'clock. Flexibility has just been accelerated, but it's not new.
Yeah, great point. Simon, talking about Stantec, but also, just your peers and clients and everyone else you're talking to. Stantec is a behemoth employer here in downtown Edmonton, and you're globally recognized as a top employer. So how are you handling this return to work when you look at our market versus other markets? And you talked a little bit about using, honey instead of vinegar. What do some of those incentives look like, and how do we grapple with this when we think about our staff and balancing their needs with the company's needs and the community's needs?
It's a really good question, and it one of the things you have to look at is some of the barriers. There's, like I said, there's some of I'll get to the positives in a second, but on the negatives, we have to kind of address some of those. By September, we're talking about, doors wide open after Labor Day. But the trouble is, by Labor Day, people have gone 18 months of adjusting to a brand new regime and lifestyle. So one of the things, for example, is they haven't had to commute. They haven't had to spend any money on gas, any money on parking, any money on transit. And so parking in the downtown can be over $200, over $300. So if you have a high income, that's great. But if you have a moderate income, going back to downtown and having to spend $200 or $300 a month out of your disposable income for parking is a big barrier. Same thing with kind of going to transit and the time associated with it. The other thing around it that that's a concern in some cities and a little bit for Edmonton too is around the issue of safety. Until there's kind of a large critical mass of people, the perception of downtown Edmonton and many downtowns is it adequately safe enough? I'm a 200-pound guy. Maybe I'm not as intimidated by certain environments, but I'd say my wife, who's 5'2", is going to feel a lot more comfortable going down some streets at some hours. And so we have to be aware of that. We can't just say the person setting the policy shouldn't be someone like me. The person setting the policy on this and thinking about these things about return should be somebody who's aware of these things and is conscientious about it and kind of thinking about these kind of barriers. Elder care and childcare, I think that gets a little bit better. I think things by Labor Day should be looking like 2019 in terms of daycares and schools being kind of back to normal and so forth. But I think some of the safety issues around transit, around walking around the downtown, every year the percentage of the workforce that is women in white collar jobs goes up because women are now making 60 to 70%, depending on the profession, 60 to 70% of graduates. So, and that reflects then in terms of law firms, engineering firms, government hiring. And we know that the stats show that disproportionately women use transit more than men in order to get to downtowns and so forth, which is another reason we have to think about if you're using transit, it's not just you get off the train or the bus and your job's right there. You also still have to get off and maybe walk a couple blocks to get there. So these are the sorts of things that I think we have to wrestle with. One of the things that I think that we have to think about is how do we, it's depending on, we're also conscientious that not all businesses in Edmonton and all businesses within Stantec are the same. Some are very tight labor markets and it's very competitive. And in some cases, it's very much an employee's market. And so we also don't want to make sure that we are kind of dictatorial about it, but rather kind of very responsible and have great communication with people about that. But it's going to be a big challenge. We would like to have, I think at some point, vaccine passports and be able to do that. And you can ask for that in the US. But as the point was made before, the trouble with vaccine passports is that if you're going to do that for staff, you also have to do that for clients. And are you willing to tell the client, are you vaccinated? And if you're not vaccinated, you're not welcome in our office space. And are you willing to say that to clients? Now, if you can listen to conspiracy theories, 70% of the population now has microchips in them. So you could just scan and see if they have a microchip in them. But I don't subscribe to that. But I'm sure there's a few outliers out there that watch certain super right-wing media in the United States that believe that way, but that would be the other way. You wouldn't need vaccine passports. You just got the microchip.
Yeah, those are such interesting concepts you introduced, and actually you kind of segued really nicely on the safety front to my first question for Christy. So Christy, you're a couple of months now, I think, into your new role, which is actually a newly created position in the city manager's office, specifically on this issue of safety and vibrancy, specifically downtown. And Simon kind of set up some points really nicely there about how that intersects, but do you want to talk a little bit about how your role intersects with this conversation about getting people back to work downtown and what that looks like from the city's perspective?
Thanks, Panita. Yeah, it's a great segue for sure. I mean, I'll start with the obvious, and perhaps this is really clear to everybody, but the need to return to the workplace in downtown is so closely tied to the need to bring critical mass back into our, business district and our downtown core. And really, that's why we're all here. But more than that, we're looking at a complex ecosystem, and downtown vibrancy is critical to the attraction of talent and capital and investment in the downtown, but also the larger city region. So while the city of Edmonton has, invested really heavily in our downtown over the years, really the past year has put a damper on that, has slowed our momentum and created new challenges. So recently, I've been appointed at the city manager's office starting in early June of this year, and our city manager and our executive leadership team have deemed downtown vibrancy one of the 8 top priorities, really understanding that, close tie between our success as a local economy and, even as a large part of the province. So It is one of those top priorities. And in addition to the great work of my partners in urban planning and economy department, we work closely with our local partners such as the Downtown Business Association and others in the downtown and also across the city to make sure that we're developing a really robust strategy for how to recover right now in the short term, but of course into the longer term. So I've been appointed to help bring short-term focused attention on some of the short-term immediate actions we need to take given this unique moment and opportunity in front of us as we come out of the lockdown experience we've had over the past year and a half. But really it's about supporting the larger work that the city is doing with their partners. So this role is unique in that it's not new work. It's really to add the weight of the city manager's office and the leadership there to help support the ongoing work in our downtown with our partners. We recognized also that COVID has changed the community's demands on us as a municipality, and we need to adapt. So really I'm focusing on helping watch how we adapt to that changing dynamic and making sure that we have citywide coordination and leadership as we navigate the changing landscape in front of us, and that we're creating opportunities to remove red tape, make it simpler and easier for our business community to thrive in the new reality. So it's been a challenging year and a half, but we need to be agile, and really that's one of the reasons why I've been appointed to help support that work, and knowing that as we try to adapt, there are going to be things that are quite challenging, and there's going to be competing priorities that we are faced with as a municipality. And helping kind of work city administration through that is one of the areas of focus for me. We know that this work too is certainly not done in isolation. Many of you on the call are partners of ours and others that aren't here today. So I'm here, on a short-term basis. I'm a long-term employee at the city, about 10 years now. So having that cityscape understanding is helpful, but this is definitely a new kind of venture for us, but not a fleeting priority. That's for sure.
Thank you for that, Christy. We've really appreciated the city's partnership on some of these issues over the past few months. And there's a couple questions coming in on the chat, which are very good questions. So I'm going to save these to the end. We'll have at least 20 minutes to get through some of these, and I think we'll dig into some of these specific issues around safety initiatives downtown. But just to keep going on some of what each of you brought up. So talking about some of the measures that are in place right now or that employers are considering introducing, I'm curious what you all think, what's going to stick with us for the foreseeable future in terms of COVID-19 measures and procedures and requirements and considerations versus what are the things that are kind of gonna go away. So things like masking requirements within the office space and distancing and at what point, given that there's not really a legal mandate anymore for masking, what are employers doing right now on some of those things, and how long do we expect some of those things to stay versus we're talking about post Labor Day, does everything go away? What are you seeing and hearing? Maybe let's start with you, Tara, just because you've had some of those conversations with clients.
Yeah, I've sort of seen the gamut amongst different clients about what they've done. Some of them are being fairly conservative in their approach to the return to the office, and they're sort of waiting to see how all this pans out, which I don't think is a bad idea given the experience that countries like Great Britain, for example, have had. You start dealing with one element of COVID, and then suddenly you're hit by a variant. And I read somewhere the other day they're actually now logging about 51,000 new cases of COVID in this new variant every day, and they've been warned to expect up to 100,000 over the next few weeks per day of these new cases. So I think some people are taking quite a cautious approach just to see how all this is going to work. So they're maintaining the masking requirements and social distancing and sanitizing procedures that they've had in the office, just for the time being, perhaps just to give it some time and see how all that pans out. Other companies have actually just taken the July 1st reopening completely on its face, have completely done away with mask wearing inside the office, any sanitization procedures. The plexiglass that once separated their cubicles is now gone. And it sort of ties into one of the questions that Carla Voss, I think, asked earlier in the chat function, is that, she'd asked the question of, are you aware, have there been any COVID-19 outbreaks? And I am aware of one. It's probably coming, since we've only sort of had that release since July 1st. But I am aware of one in a fairly small workplace where 8 of their employees had to be quarantined again due to a COVID outbreak. But they had, rid themselves of all the COVID precautions that they had been practicing in the year prior. So now they're sort of back at ground zero again with this new COVID outbreak. I suspect that with people who have not maintained that kind of precaution, we probably will see more as time goes on. That will eventually, and of course, gradually taper off. But I don't think that we're quite out of the woods yet. It's a bit of a mixed bag what people are doing, but I think that a lot of people are just playing it cautiously right now and maintaining things until we get the all clear.
Interesting. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I think that companies have the comfort and the liability both at stake. And for us, masking is still required when you get to our floor. We still have sanitization stations and social distancing happening within the space. And that allows people to be more comfortable. And it also is just safer. But I think that until you start hearing about more breakthroughs amongst vaccinated people becoming ill, we're on the right trend. And that if by and large unvaccinated people, which is typically, Canada is leading G20 right now in vaccination rates. So when you have 80% of the population vaccinated, and those that are becoming ill are almost entirely the unvaccinated, that bodes well for social activities and corporate activities to be able to have slowly introducing more freedom that aligns with social acceptance outside of the office.
I think one of the things that, because the US has been open for longer and I spend 90% of my day working with the US, one of the things I think that is frustrating is when everyone's going to ballparks and watching games and going to movie theaters, and I hear this all the time. So everyone's going to restaurants and pubs and so all of their life is back to 2019, except going back to the office, so that they feel comfortable going to a restaurant, comfortable going to a ballpark, comfortable going to a movie, but they somehow don't seem comfortable going back to the office. So there's a bit of a double standard there. So it's like, so in terms of broader society. So I think one of the challenges as we start thinking about this is at some point it becomes less about health and safety, especially as we become one of the most we're on path to becoming one of the most vaccinated countries in the whole world, not just the G7, and more about the lifestyle people want to have. And so how do we incentivize getting people back, knowing that it's less and less of a health and safety and more about other things. It doesn't mean that we have to be mindful of the Delta or any other kind of variant and practice good procedures. But nevertheless, I think at some point it's not just about health and safety, because they're not practicing in their normal lives. They're starting to break bread with people inside their homes and other things, but they won't do that in the office. So there becomes a bit of a double standard.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And if I could just add to what Simon was saying, that I think there is a bit of an element there's a psychological element that employers have to be cognizant of as well. Simon says people are getting more comfortable going out to restaurants and to movie theaters and have this mental block about coming into work. Now, how much of that is they just enjoy remote work versus it's been a year, 15 months for some people that they've been working exclusively from home, and there is going to be a psychological adjustment coming back to the office full time. And I think that's something that everyone has to be cognizant of. But, as Simon pointed out, and as Corey mentioned, we're now one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. And as that continues, at some point, the government is going to officially say, pandemic is done. We're over, we're finished. And that'll be the reality that we have to deal with after that in terms of the hybrid work arrangements. How are we going to continue with those?
Yeah, the psychological component is so interesting. There's for sure a social anxiety component there. We're hearing that about high school students, and certainly we're all feeling that to a certain degree. I don't really remember what it feels like to be around a real boardroom table, and yeah, that'll be interesting for sure. Christy, do you want to jump in with a final comment on that question?
Sure, I'll comment quickly. You know, the city, given the many lines of business that we have, we've had thousands of employees who've worked during the entire pandemic. So the question about the social anxiety and how to address it has been one that we've been grappling with, you know, for the past year and a half, of course, being sensitive to that with those who've worked the front lines since the, you know, the pandemic started. So from an occupational health and safety perspective, you know, we've really just made sure to align with how we would deal with any workplace hazard, and, you know, aligning our controls with, you know, a reasonable risk management approach, and ensuring that we're communicating really well to employees what it is that those safety controls are and those safety measures, and how they, you know, are understood to reduce the risk to a reasonable degree. And if we go down a path of, you know, refusal, then you follow your normal refusal for work path. And having that already in place really is helpful. That way you show due diligence around, you know, investigating the concern, communicating, you know, what you have in place, and having that process followed. So just some experience from the city, we've been dealing with that from the beginning, and we really just tried our best to follow normal safety measures and communication strategies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think someone had a specific question around that. So I want to get into the audience questions, but I'm going to ask one last one that's sort of selfish, actually. You know, we talk about some of these like maybe invisible or unspoken barriers to people coming back downtown. So perhaps safety is one of them, perhaps just like that draw just isn't there. So I mean, we at the DBA and a lot of folks are doing whatever we can to create those incentives for the whole community to want to come back. So we've got Downtown Live launched again. There will be, you know, live music happening throughout downtown. There's, you know, the art galleries reopen. All of our restaurant patios are bustling again. And so there's all those positives to coming back into the workplace and coming back into the downtown. So I'm curious, from each of your perspective, what are you hearing from employees that is that honey that seems to be working? What are the incentives and the attractions and the benefits to coming back into the office that seem to be making this more of a positive, forward moving conversation, rather than, you know, getting mired down in the like, you know, dragging people kicking and screaming downtown conversation?
I think one of the things for us has been getting inertia, because right now there's zero inertia. So you can't even get to momentum if there's an inertia. So one of the ways to create inertia is we've had started in the US, but I think we're going to see more of it in Canada, which is having the most senior leaders in the company start to go around to different offices and have all staff meetings. And having all staff meetings where you buy everyone lunch, you break bread, and you do that. And so all of a sudden, as people do more and more of those sorts of things, it kind of creates a little bit of inertia, and then you build on it with kind of the different various subgroups within the organization. They then do all staff functions and do, whether it's a team building thing or it's something else, to do that just to create some inertia. Because I think we can't go, you have to just get people back to even their routine. You know, if they cycle to work, is my bike lock still on in the bike cage? I had to figure that out recently because I was in the office last week. Did city change in Edmonton, for example? The city changed all the bus routes during COVID. Well, what bus now do I catch downtown if I take transit, right? Because all the bus routes have been changed since COVID. So does the number 9 still go here and go there? Does this do this? And what would, like, all those kind of, we have to kind of create some patterns, like how does traffic now going downtown? Is it easy, is hard, is parking less, is it cost the same amount? Things like that. And so I think we have to just get people just to come downtown a few times, get a little bit of inertia. And then the other thing I think for a lot of organizations, it's going to incentivize a lot more as well, as government being back. So I think part of the reason that a lot of people are downtown is that they have meetings with government, and meeting with their bankers, the finance projects, meetings with government that regulate, and a lot of the reason that the private sector is downtown is proximity to government for government related meetings. So if government's not downtown and you're able to do government related meetings through this medium, then I think people will continue to do that. So I think when government, whether it's 3 levels of government or downtown en masse, that I think that you're going to have a lot of the private sector going to follow, because those meetings are going to be in person. And you don't want to just meet with government. You want to also have relationship building, for example, right? The small talk before and after a meeting, you're going to miss out on that more so if it's through this medium, through being there in person. So I think that we have to get focused on the inertia and the things that are going to drive people in. And I think we also have to realize that government has a big role to play in this, in the sense that when government related meetings are happening relating the approval of projects, whether it's an energy project, whether it's a development project happening, that those sorts of things further incentivize people kind of being downtown as well.
You know, on the point about inertia, it's really fascinating for us to see the post return to office interviews that take place, and a lot of the vast majority of the feedback is along the theme of, I forgot how good it feels to be back. I forgot how energizing it is to be with my coworkers. I spend more time with my coworkers than I do with anyone else in my life, and I miss that feeling of that energy. And just think of the analogy that if you're going down 104th Street or White Avenue, and you see two restaurants, one on one side of the road is packed and the other one is completely empty, you're going to choose the one that's packed because you just want to be around people and energy. And it's just human nature. We want to be around an energized environment. And so you can build office space in any building, but you can't manufacture vibrancy. And so the buildings that'll be the most successful are in neighborhoods that have the vibrancy. That's where the city and other organizations have such an important role to create that street life comfort and safety and energy that allows people to want to be there. Because once you're in the elevator and up on the floor, you can be in any building. But it's the buildings and the neighborhoods that have the vibrancy that will come out ahead.
Yep, agreed. Anyone else on that question?
Yeah, I can say that from our own perspective in the firm, one of the things that we've heard from staff very recently and over the past couple of months is how much they have missed the interaction with other people in the firm. You know, how much they've enjoyed coming to work and having that personal interaction. And you know, I think we've done a fairly good job, I think, in having those kinds of remote events where people get together and have fun and do those things, and it keeps that kind of connection between people. But people are missing that in-person contact, and they're missing that social interaction, like people have said. So I think we have a tendency to, as employers, to underestimate how much that means to people. You know, you think that people would think one way, well, actually, they're thinking with their hearts rather than their heads. So, I mean, that's an important thing to consider in anyone's return to work plans. And I think that the kinds of things that the DBA has been talking about, putting on events, drawing people downtown, are going to be the same things that draw our employees back in as well. You know, the group things that they can do at lunchtime. Taste of Edmonton was always a huge thing for our staff. You know, being able to participate in downtown events together, that is going to be what draws a lot of people back into work. You know, that leads to a whole other discussion about how to ensure that remote workers are still feel included, you know, and how to ensure that there's a fair assessment of performance over time. But that's something that probably take me another 20 minutes to talk about. I'll skip it for now. But
I was going to say we could keep talking for a long time about this, and those are great points. And Taste of Edmonton starts tomorrow, by the way, in case anyone wanted to communicate that to their staff. I'm going to go to some of our audience questions. I want to make sure we get to some of these. So Laura Haynes asked, how is the city managing the safety issue downtown with their partners as we move forward? So I'm going to take that one to Christy, but I will say, you know, I check in with a lot of the property managers downtown regularly. As occupancy levels have creeped upwards, you know, buildings are looking at more like closer to 30% of the building is actually filled with people. The number of incidents of whatever it is, whether it be vandalism or anything like that, have gone down dramatically already. So I think if anyone maybe hasn't been downtown in the last couple of weeks, I think some of the changes that we knew would start to happen as people started being here, you know, at least during the day, but even around the clock, is already making a difference. But I know the city's also made a few steps. So I'll turn it over to Christy to answer that.
Thanks, Panita. And it's a really good question. I mean, there's many aspects of how you would, you know, improve and manage safety and security in the downtown. But I mentioned earlier that we're evolving how we work based on what we've learned over the past year, and certainly not having the eyes and ears in mass on the street has created, you know, a feeling of lack of safety and perhaps exacerbated existing social problems that we have already, you know, been having. So one of the ways that we've evolved is to rethink how we use and deploy our safety and security resources from our neighborhood revitalization team, our community support teams, our social supports and partnerships there, our enforcement personnel, and our safety and security people, to make sure that we're taking a multidisciplinary approach and that we're not just throwing enforcement folks and police at, you know, all of our vulnerable population type of concerns. And I know at times criminal and vulnerable population issues sometimes intersect a little bit. And I think moving away from assuming everything is criminal and ensuring that we're deploying the right resource with the right skills and compassionate approach as needed to help address some of these things. So we've been very intentional about doing this. As an example, we've partnered peace officers with social workers so that they're going out and they're, you know, helping some of our folks who are difficult to house and, you know, homeless, vulnerable on the street, and can quite honestly be a deterrent to, you know, people accessing businesses, and sometimes a nuisance to the business community, to be honest. But there are also people that need support and help. So we want to make sure that we have a warm handoff approach from receiving that complaint, how we deploy the resource, the right resource for whatever the issue is. They assess it with a multidisciplinary lens, and they figure out how to work with and support that person in a way that's compassionate, but also meets the needs of the business community so that they can do the great work that they do and, you know, serve their patrons and clients. So it's one example of how we've looked at an issue that we've had all along, decided to tackle it differently. It's not necessarily that it's new, it's just we've learned some things. And I really think that in the short term, it helps people. It's frankly the right thing to do, but also it helps break that cycle of continuous acute homelessness that then turns into chronic homelessness. The issue is huge. Of course, it goes beyond just the vulnerable population, but that's just one example of how we're working together with internal city folks as well as our social support partners and EPS to make sure that we're improving safety and security downtown and being compassionate to that population of our community.
Yeah, I think that partnership between enforcement and social agencies is key. I think that's one of the innovations that I've seen out of the pandemic that I'm most excited about. Like EPS has their new help team and help facility, and the fact that our social agencies are in there with them and AHS is in there with them. Like, I think actually Edmonton is going to end up, if not already, being seen as a bit of a leader in how we truly help and support and work productively through some of these challenges instead of just defaulting to enforcement or, you know, whatever else other cities have done over the years. Another question here around occupational health and safety. So what if a staff member refuses work because of their fear of being exposed to COVID, particularly a variant? So if they can't refuse work based on that fear and then they were to get sick, what's that legal exposure for an employer? This is kind of like the big, I guess, overarching question right now. I'm going to go to Tara on this one.
I'll jump in on this. Essentially, every workplace has an obligation to maintain, you know, the health and safety of its workers, but it's never a guarantee. The status is: have you done your due diligence? Have you taken reasonable efforts? You know, no one expects a level of perfection, and there's absolutely no workplace in the world that can guarantee anyone that they won't get the COVID virus despite their best efforts. So if you have an employee that's refusing to come to work because they're scared of the variant or they're scared of COVID, there's a number of different ways to deal with that. The first one is, of course, to coach them on all the health and safety measures that you're taking and how you're working to prevent the spread of COVID in the workplace. If they still refuse to come in after that, you can actually ask an occupational health and safety inspector to come in and do their own assessment. And if they find as well that you're taking the appropriate safety measures, then the employee does actually have to return to work or could be deemed to have resigned their employment. You know, that's one measure that you can take to get someone back into work who refuses. You can also try and accommodate them to the extent that, you know, you can allow work from home for that person if it's workable, if they don't absolutely need to be in the office. But if someone does come in and you've taken all the precautions necessary, and you can establish that you've done that, and they get COVID notwithstanding, then you've done what you need to do under occupational health and safety. You can't guarantee that someone is not going to catch the virus. All you can do is use your best efforts to make sure that your workplace is safe, and that's all you can do.
The other challenge we're going to have is we know that there are, jokes aside, we know that there are people in society that just don't, they don't believe in vaccines. They won't get, some obviously have got health issues, but the majority of people that have not been vaccinated, believe some kind of conspiracy theory and don't want to get vaccinated. And so there is a minority that, for various reasons, maybe allergies or other things, are not able to get vaccinated. But the other challenge we've had in some offices is, again, the US, because they're ahead of us in terms of the degree of opening, is people are saying, well, yeah, I'm vaccinated, but I've got kids under 12 that are not vaccinated, and so sitting, 8 feet away from me is not vaccinated and is constantly, you don't have to wear your mask at a cubicle, and sometimes they're slow to put it on and do things, and they're an anti-vaxxer, and I know that, and I'm fearful of working near that kind of person because my kids aren't vaccinated. I'm worried that I might, even though I'm vaccinated, I'm worried they're going to take that and bring that home and affect my kids. And I'm really worried about that, and I don't want my 11 or 10-year-old or whatever to get sick and get a variant. And so that's one of the other kind of issues that we're starting to deal with is, it's one thing if you're confident everyone's vaccinated, but in some parts of, and we know Alberta and Saskatchewan are lagging Canada in terms of vaccinations, is some people being fearful about working with others that they know have strong viewpoints against vaccination. So what do you do with that in the workplace in terms of, even if you are following safety standards, people are going to be very fearful and saying, well, I don't want to work near there, I want to sit differently because of that, or that sort of thing. So these are some of the issues I think that we are going to have to be wrestled with. But I think we have to have a kid gloves model to it, and you can't be taking a sledgehammer with some overarching policy. We're going to have to be very sensitive to it, and we also don't want to be forcing people to do stuff, even though the rules might be this. We certainly don't want to stand to kind of force people to do certain things that makes them uncomfortable. We want people to feel safe in the workplace. That's really important to us. And health and safety is very, very important in our business. So it's not just even what the rules are, it's also about comfort, making sure we're abiding by people's comfort level too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and sounds like a great approach. Well, thank you all so much. I just realized we're at 12:58 here. I'm sure Nan wants to come on and wrap this up. Hello. Thanks again, Anand, for the invitation to moderate this discussion. These are really important conversations to have. I feel like we could have talked for another hour, but happy to be here. And thanks again for the invitation.
No, thank you very much for hosting, Panita, and for all of our panelists for doing it. I agree. I think we're going to keep having this conversation as we move forward. I really liked hearing, the approach of the whole experience of getting into the office and all of the advantages as you get there. And I think it just highlights some of the great work that the City of Edmonton and that the DBA are doing. Just a big shout out to all the great work that you've done through Downtown Spark, Route 107, and some of the upcoming things that I've been hearing about. That are just a great opportunity for people to enjoy, coming back. I think we got there's definitely enough problems, but I just really appreciate this group, all of our panelists and all the work. So thanks very much, you guys. Wanted to quickly mention the NAIOP's been active in this area as well. A big shout out to the city through their downtown vibrancy strategy, which several of our members have been contributing to, and through NAIOP, and we're really excited to continue on in that work. And it's a good opportunity, as we say, to have this kind of joyous return to the office in September and have that really exciting experience. So just quickly to summarize our upcoming events, we have golf on August 19th. I just checked, there are only 9 tickets left. 1 ticket sold while we've been talking. So get the last of those. I didn't mention earlier, we've got our virtual meet and greet with council candidates. It's a great opportunity to talk about the issues of the commercial real estate industry. We'll be advertising that next week. There'll be one for each council candidate. We'll be talking about some of the fundamentals of commercial real estate and have an opportunity to talk with candidates for council in every single ward. That'll happen various dates in August. And then we have our mayoral forum event on September 9th. So we'll have an opportunity to see everybody in person or online then. Thanks so much, you guys. And thanks again to our panelists and to you, Panita, for hosting.